So these week's parshios, these portions are all about, we're leading up to the Exodus from Egypt, the leaving of Egypt. Now, the messages of this week's parsha and all the following next week's parsha as well, and even last week's, it's obviously has to do with us as well. So when we're talking about leaving Egypt, it says that a person is required, we are required every day to look at it as if we left Egypt. What does that mean? We're not leaving Egypt. What does it mean that we have to see it as if we are going out of Egypt every day? So the word Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, means Meitzarim. It means constrictions. It means being held back, being enslaved, being held back and being constricted from really reaching your full potential and what you really want to be doing. So in this week's Torah portion, we're at the right at the almost leading up to the redemption, leaving Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt. So it's also teaching us how we can also find our own exodus from our own restrictions, from the things in our lives that are holding us back, from the things that are stopping us from reaching our goals, the things that are stopping us from reaching the promised land, so to speak. So all the steps in this week's Torah portion are not just talking about the Exodus from Egypt, but they're also talking about us leaving our own restrictions and our own constrictions and getting us out of there. And so we start off the week's parsha we ended off last week's Torah portion with Moses, speaking to God, and he's saying to God, Lama harayosa la'am hazeh, why have you done evil to this people? You sent me to Paro, you sent me to free the people, to free my nation, and what happened after that? Paro was even worse to them. He made the work even harder. And that's where the last week's Torah portion ends off. You know, like sometimes you read a chapter or you see a part of a show and it like stops right at that point, right? And like in order to get you hooked on it, so you want to see it next week. And that's where it ended off last week. Moshe says to God, why have you done evil to this people? Why have you done so bad? And then this week's Torah portion is Vaeira, which means I appeared. And God is saying, I appeared to the forefathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I appeared to them, but I appeared to them only with part of myself, as Kel Shaddai, as God who is like used his influence in this world. And to you, I'm about to appear my special name, which is Havaya, which is God's holiest of names, the essential name, the name that we don't even say it's so holy. We don't say any of God's names, but this name we don't even know how to pronounce. It's so holy. This is this very special name that the Kohen Gadol would only say on Yom Kippur. So I'm going to appear to you. I'm going to show you my essence, who I am. But God is saying to Moshe, and it seems like God is almost rebuking him. Mm-hmm. He's saying, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to them, they never questioned me. They never said, why have you done evil to this nation? Why have you done negativity to us? And yet I'm appearing to you, and I'm going to show you really the essence of what I am, and here you are complaining. Right away, you're saying, why have you done evil to this people? So it sounds as if God is rebuking Moses for his question, rebuking him for saying, why have you done evil to this people? I mean, I told Abraham to slaughter his son, God is saying, and he didn't say anything to me. He didn't complain to me. And yet you're coming to me and you're saying, why have you done evil to this people? So that's the simple meaning of what God is saying to Moses. He's rebuking him for his question. But on a deeper level, this is actually God's response to Moshe of why I have done evil to this people. God is saying to Moshe, I appeared to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as in a limited way. I showed them a limited aspect of who I am, of my name to them. I showed them how I work in this world. But to you, I'm going to appear at Matan Torah. We actually saw God face to face. So I'm going to appear to you so much more to this nation. And that is why now they're suffering. Now, what does this mean? Think of a time in your life that you've had like a strong progress or strong revelation for something, a tremendous of success at something. Very often, right before that period, or a creative outburst, if any of you are creative here, very often before that creative outburst, there's a period of time where you're not thinking of anything. Like nothing's working, nothing's going. And then suddenly you have this like idea that comes to your head and this way of doing things, right? We see that in life, our world is created in a way that there's this ebb and flow of things. We breathe in and we breathe out, right? There's winter where there's complete hibernation, and then like now, right? Especially here. Right, exactly. And then there's the spring where you have this all this growth and all this, this tremendous spring, all the vegetation is coming to life. We have this every day. We have nighttime where we stop, we are kind of inward bound, we relax, there's nothing going on, and then daytime where we're full of energy and we're going and we're doing and we're acting. So we have this ebb and flow in general in life. For example, take an example of a teacher who's talking to his student, or a parent who's talking to his child. And let's say the child asks a question and says, "Dad, can you explain this and this to me?" And maybe it's sometimes a very difficult question that the father really has to think how to explain it on this child's level. So you might have even a moment of reflection where the parent has to kind of take a step back and think in his mind, go into his mind to think about how am I going to now relate this to my child. And that moment, it seems like the father is almost ignoring the child because he's really deeply thinking about how to take this concept and explain it to his child. And in that moment of where the father's kind of in his head, the child might feel, why are you abandoning me? What did I do wrong? Like, why aren't you talking to me? But it's only after that the father will come with this huge outburst of actually explaining it. We explained, I think, by Rosh Hashanah time, when you take a hose and you constrict it, there's this constriction. Right after that, there's this big flow, there's this big burst. So in the same way, God is saying, when there's a revelation of godliness, there first is this stopping, this nothingness, this concealment where you don't see God, where the concealment is so strong that the Jewish people were suffering in Egypt. But it's this concealment in order to actually bring forth a tremendous enlightenment, a tremendous revelation of God. And that's what God is explaining to Moshe. I am going to be revealing to myself, to you, and to the Jewish people as Havaya, as the essence of God, this deep, deep revelation of God. But in order for me to do that, in order for that to happen, first there has to be this not revelation, this lack of revelation, this hiddenness, in order for there to be that tremendous outpouring. Now why? Why does it have to be like that? If we think about it, really, God is saying, I'm going to reveal this tremendous truth to you. The truth at Mount Sinai, the truth of the Torah. How can we prepare ourselves to receive the truth of God, the quintessential truth of God, which is the Torah at Mount Sinai? In order for us to prepare ourselves to receive that, we have to come into our truth. And what is our truth? Truth is something that is, nowadays everyone's into my truth, right? Like, I'll tell you my truth of how I saw the situation. But that's really not what truth is. That's your opinion, that's your perspective, that's how you see things. That's not your truth. There is not your truth and my truth. There is objective truth. Mm-hmm. To see objective truth, what is objective truth? Truth is something that is not changing. It doesn't change. It's a principle that always is, no matter circumstances or no matter situation. Truth is non-changing. It's always there. It's constant. So what is something that's constant in us? God is going to show us his truth, his Torah, the revelation, the blueprint of how he created the world and how we can connect to God. How can we show him our truth in connecting to him? So what can we show God? We can show God that even during the times of suffering, even when God's face is hidden from us, even when we can't feel God in our lives, there's one constant, and that is our connection to him, our belief in him. Even when we're suffering in Egypt, and even when we are suffering in our own circumstances, in our own lives, there's this feeling that God is there. I'm calling out to God. It might be a questioning of God. It might be an anger towards God. It might be, please God, a pleading towards God, but there's a connection. We believe in God. So the Jewish people had to go through the suffering in Egypt before this tremendous revelation, because it's in that suffering that they're showing, we still believe in you, God. We're still calling out to you, God. This constant, this truth is something that's unchanging. It's not something that ever changes. And you can think about it as in a relationship, a husband and wife relationship. There are times in a relationship when things are very difficult. And it's when you can still keep that connection. The love might not be so apparent, but the connection is still there. When you can keep that connection, even in your anger, even when you're upset, even in your rejection, when you feel rejected, even when you're ready to really throw them out of the house, right? But you still are keeping that connection. Even in your anger, you're still feeling that connection. That shows the depth of the relationship. So the relationship isn't only in times when everything is good and everything is wonderful. Even in a crisis, even in a time of anger, even in a time of rejection, you're still keeping that connection. That shows that the relationship is real. And similarly, by the Jewish people still believing in God, even in Egypt, even in the suffering and the difficulties of Egypt, even when God's face was, so to speak, hidden. We couldn't see God. It felt like God rejected us. And we're still keeping that relationship. That's a constant. That is a truth. So in order for God to reveal his truth to us, we needed to reveal our truth to him. And what is our truth? Our truth is that we are always connected, that the connection is there. In the good times, in the bad times, in whatever times, there is always that connection. It might be a connection of anger, that's okay. It might be a connection where you're crying out and you're pleading to God. It might be a connection where you're saying, like Moses said, why are you doing evil to these people? But you're by saying that, you're believing in God. Mm-hmm. And so that's why God is kind of answering Moshe in this statement. This is what happened. This is why the suffering in Egypt is happening, because this revelation is about to occur. This revelation at Sinai, which is the most magnificent revelation of God, is going to happen. So first, the Jewish people have to show me their constant, their commitment, their connection, even in difficult times. And when we think about it, really, crying out to God, like Moshe did, why have you done evil to this people? Or in our own terms, when we call out to God and we complain to God and we say to God, why is this happening? This is really, if you think about it, this is the greatest form of belief. Okay? This is the greatest way that this is the greatest expression. The greatest expression of showing our belief in God is crying out to him and complaining to him. Because when a person calls out to God, when Moshe calls out to God and says, why have you done evil to this people? Or when you call out to God and you say, God, why is this happening? Why are you hidden from me? That's showing that you believe in God. That's showing that you are a believer. Because someone who's not a believer wouldn't call out to God. If someone is not a believer, then they would believe that things should happen haphazardly. Right? It's the survival of the fittest. Whoever's the roughest and toughest, that's the person who survives. Things don't make sense in our world. It's supposed to be just coincidence. Whatever happens, happens. It's happenstance, right? But when you believe that there is a good God, there's a good God that's running the world, that God is good and everything that he does for you is good and he's connected to you, when you truly believe that, that is when you can call out to God and say, why is this happening in my life? You're good, God. I know you're good. I know my relationship with you is strong. Why is this happening then? So really, complaining against God is kind of the biggest expression of belief in God. Because it's when you complain to God and you say, why are you causing this suffering to me or to another individual? This is your expression of belief. Because God who's good shouldn't be causing suffering. God who's good should not be hiding his face. God who's good only wants good for me and for all the Jewish people and for all those around me. So how could you be causing this negativity? This is showing how much I believe in you, God. I'm calling out in anger, despair, whatever terms you want to call. I'm calling out of my intense emotions because I believe in you, and this shouldn't be happening. If I didn't believe in you, then I believe in chance. Then I believe in Darwinism, that everything is just how it's supposed to be, and whoever fights the hardest and wins. Everything is just happens to be. We're all mistakes, right? We're all just mistakes that happen to happen, this coincidence. So why are you, if you're a mistake, so why do you care if another mistake happens? Why do you care if there's negativity or evil in this world? But no, we care that there's an evil in this world. We care that there's negativity in this world because we believe that there should be order. We believe in a God who's good. And that's why we call out to God and say, God, why is this happening? Why is this negativity happening? Why is this evil? Why is this suffering happening? This is not you. So, some people say believers don't complain to God. No, we say the biggest believers are the ones that complain. We complain to God because we say we want to see things in a good way. Ultimately, we don't understand God's ways, and ultimately we succumb, and that's why we continue believing in God no matter what the outcome is. But it's quite human and quite even positive to call out like Moshe did, like Moses did, saying, why have you done negativity to this people? Why, God, is there evil? Why, God, is there suffering? Why, God, is there bad things that happen to good people? Why? It doesn't make sense. Because I believe in you, God.
Did he ask this? Wait, this was when he was at the first of the bush? When he went up to see God, or was it after he went to Paro and then they were told they had to work harder?
Exactly.
And then so then the question again is then, were they not suffering enough? Were they not believing enough? Why did they have to work even harder?
So it was the darkness, the greatest darkness. It says the strongest darkness is right before the sun comes out, right before the dawn. So this was the hardest suffering. Once the plagues start in this week's Torah portion, they didn't have to work. But it was right before that it was kind of the final test, the final what are you in it with me or not? That was the final test that they were given, and that was what they emerged from saying, we still believe, we're still ready to believe in you. But that was when Moshe says to God, why have you done evil to this people? So so that is, that's really the point, that deep down we are all believers. I remember I was doing a Shabbaton once, and there was a group of women. One of the women was from Russia, and she came to me from the former Soviet Union, and she came to me and she said, I wish I was a believer. I've gone through so much in the education that I had. Everything was so anti-religion, and I grew up in this kind of environment. I wish I could believe, but I just don't believe. And then I gave a talk, and in the talk I was talking about a little boy who raised his hand and said, Shema Yisrael. Even in his deepest despair, he called out to God, and he believed in God. And I looked in the room, and she's sitting there, and she's crying. This is the believer, the person who says, I'm not a believer. I wish I was a believer. Here she's sitting and she's crying. If someone's not a believer, why are you crying? But ultimately, that is the belief. We want, she's crying out, I wish I was a believer, but really, this is her belief. And that's what God is saying as well to Moshe, that the Torah portion is called Vaeira, and I appeared. God is talking about his appearance to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But really, the greatest message that God is giving us is even in Egypt, even in the enslavement that the Jewish people are going through in Egypt, there is this belief, there is this revelation, there's this seeing God. Because even in our hardships, we can see God. Even in our difficulties, we can see God. Why can we see God? Because God appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God appeared to our forefathers. And so it's inherited, this faith that we all have. Even when we're going through difficult times, we have to nurture it, we have to develop it, but the faith is there. The faith is something that's steadfast, that's within us as the Jewish people. And that's what we're seeing. That's kind of the hint in the name of this week's Torah portion is God appeared, Vaeira, and I appeared. God is saying, even in Egypt, even in your Egypt, even in your enslavement, even in your difficulty, even when you're feeling so low and so much is on your shoulders and so much challenging and so much suffering, we can still feel God's presence. God could still appear to us. Um, and we see this so often. I was talking to a woman who was going through a very hard time with her child, and the child had a terrible sickness, and she was, taking the child to treatment and so forth. And I said, "How did you feel? Were you angry with God? How were you feeling when you were going through all this suffering?" And she says, "I was so busy, at that time, I couldn't even feel. I couldn't feel anything. But I can just tell you one thing. Every morning when I woke up to take my child to treatment, it was not me who was going. I was a basket case. It was God who was putting one foot in front of the other." And you hear this so many times from people when you're going through harsh difficulty, and you could be angry at God at the time that you're going through that, but you still feel it's God who's putting one foot in front of the other. I'm angry at you, God, for doing this to me. I'm angry for you giving this to me. I'm feeling the suffering. I'm feeling the pain. I'm feeling such sadness in our relationship. But it was God who was holding me and putting one foot in front of the other. And that's what this week's Torah portion, Vaeira, means. That God is saying, and I appeared to your forefathers. God is saying, and I can appear to you. And the word appear is actually through sight. I was seen by Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And seeing is something that's so vivid to us. It's more than when you hear something, you hear it. When you see something, no one could tell you didn't see it because it's so clear in front of you. You remember what you've seen. Hearing, so you heard about a story, you forget, did it happen, how did it happen? Seeing is something that no one can convince you that you didn't see. And therefore, God says, I appear to you with sight, because even when you are in the suffering of Egypt, even when you're going through the difficulties of suffering in your life, the constrictions, the hardships, the challenges in your life, specifically then, you can actually see God. You can actually feel God in your life. And that's what this Torah portion is showing us.
I have a question.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
But so when you're going through a very bumpy period, I'm just coming out of a very bumpy period, and Baruch Hashem, things seem to be resolving. But I found myself, I was not angry. I just wanted to, and I know we're not supposed to ask why, but I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing? Is there something that I'm doing that's provoking this? And if what?
Right.
So I don't know if we're supposed to be doing that or examining that, and what's the best approach when you're going through something? One thing after another after another. It was like a series of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Baruch Hashem, I think it's easing up now.
Wow.
But, so what are you supposed to be thinking?
So what should you think when you're going through a hardship?
Right.
So I think when we go through a hardship, the Rebbe always taught us that everything physical is a spiritual counterpart. So if something is happening physically in our life, there's a spiritual counterpart. Sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't see it. But we need to do our part in trying. So if we're going through a difficulty, the first thing to do is to examine spiritually. What's my spiritual situation like at this time? How can I improve it? What can I do to create a conduit of blessing for my life? What can I open in order to create that conduit of blessing for my life? In other words, what can I spiritually open in order to create more blessing, this overflow of blessing in my life, so that the difficulty goes away? And it's always important to, that's why the Rebbe would always say, increase in Torah, increase in mitzvot. You're going through something difficult, take on something positive. So you don't have to think about the negative, what am I doing wrong, but you could think about, which you could, if you are doing something wrong, obviously try to stop that. But you can also try to think, like, what can I add in positively, to counter this so that I can add more spirituality in my life. And I think I told you the story about when my oldest son was little. He had one stomach illness after another. He got the flu, and he was 2 years old at the time, and he got one flu and another stomach flu, like constantly back to back. And we were going crazy, like, what's going on? And the doctor says, But I tell you, it's a virus. There's nothing to do about it. It's just bad luck, that's happening. But after a few months, he was getting more and more withdrawn, and he was a two-year-old little kid. One time, one thing after another. So I said to my husband, we need to check our mezuzahs. And at the same time, my husband happened to break his leg. It was like little kids around, my husband broken foot, my son nonstop getting sick. And so we checked our mezuzahs, and one of the mezuzahs, the word v'achalta, which means and you will eat. In the word v'achalta, the lamed, the foot of the lamed was broken off. And we fixed that, and after that the eating problems stopped, and my husband's foot got healed. And we went back to the doctor and we said, this is what happened. Look at that. And it was very interesting because after that, my son just happened to not get sick anymore. So what should we do in a situation? We should definitely think about what's going on in our lives and how we can increase spirituality in our lives. How can we channel more of the spiritual blessings in our life by opening up? That's what a mitzvah is. It's opening up the conduit for more spirituality, for more blessing in our life.
Couldn't it be coming from a past life too?
It could. We don't know. We could. That's why we have to deal with what we know. So if there is something that you could open up, it could help repair what happened in the past as well. So we don't know. There's so much that we don't know, but what we do know is if there's a blockage, you want to open it. So if there's a spiritual blockage, open it up to something positive to create more blessings in our life. Okay.
I know she's the most spiritual person, right? We know. How much more. There's nobody
I
Right.
really doing my best. I don't
I'm
know
sure
if
you
it's
are. It doesn't
right.
have to be something big either. It could be something small. Like we checked our mezuzahs,
I did too. I took 13 of them off. They're all kosher.
They're all kosher, right?
Hey, let's go back to Helen.
Could be saying,
Starting Thursday.
could be
Okay,
saying,
let's
saying
do
a
that.
prayer,
Wait,
taking.
back to Helen group, yeah.
Was the Helen group not
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah, I was just so overwhelmed.
I've been
I
reading.
really-
Yeah, she's
I let
had
it
a
go.
lot
of-
I
Just
let
had no
it go
idea.
a month, maybe more than
I
Yeah,
thought it was
let's
still
go
going
back
on.
to
We're saying,
Thursday, Mitch Hashem. Mitch Hashem.
Okay, so then the next thing that we have in the Torah portion is God says to Moshe, I am going to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. And God actually says 5 different words of how he's going to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. And these 5 words, there's actually 4 plus a fifth one. These 4 expressions of redemption is why on Passover at the Seder, how many cups of wine do we have? 4. And then plus we have the 5th cup of Eliyahu's cup, which represents the 5th cup. So these are the 4 expressions of redemption, plus the 5th one, which is about bringing you into the land of Israel. And these expressions are, so God says, and I'm going to read it to you, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of Egypt. So bring you out, Vahotsesi is the first one. And I will save you from their labor, Vihitzalti, that's the second one. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, that's the 3rd one. And I will take you to me as a people, that's Lakachti, the 4th one. And I will be God to you, and you will know that I am the Lord your God. And finally, I will bring you to the land, to the promised land. Okay, so it's, I will bring you out, Vahotsesi, Vihitzalti, I will save you, Viga'alti, I will redeem you, Vilakachti, I will take you to me as a people, and Vehevesi, and I will bring you to the promised land. So in these 5 expressions that God talks about bringing the Jewish people out of the land of Egypt, we also have 5 different ways that we can bring ourselves out of a negative habit or something negative that we're doing. And let's talk about that for a minute. God is showing us 5 different ways that we can, we often have a habit or a trigger that we want to stop. And these are the ways that we can do it. You're in a negative situation. Mitzrayim is a constricting place. It's a place that's holding you back, and you have a goal. You want to get somewhere. How do you do that? How do you break this habit? How do you break this constriction that you're in? So the first thing is, I will take you out. God says, I will bring you out of Egypt. When you have a trigger or when you have a temptation that you want to stop, the first thing that you need to do is, move away. Physically remove yourself. Exactly. Physically remove yourself from the temptation. So the chocolate bar or the potato chips that are really, really calling your name. Well, this is an easy one. We're going to later talk about harder ones that you're going to come up with. But let's talk about like the chocolate chips or the chocolates that really is beckoning to you and calling your name. The first thing is remove it from your home. Don't have it in your home or lock it away somewhere. Take it away. Remove the temptation from there. Take yourself out of these, take away these unhealthy choices from your home, from your life. For example, you're at the table and at the dinner table, right? And what's everyone doing? Looking at their phones, right? Take the phones away. Like, make a rule, make a law. No phones at the table, right? Physically remove the temptation. That's the first step. You want to break a habit? Evaluate what is the habit that you want to break, and physically take it away. Take it away. Put it away somewhere. Second step. Now that you've removed the temptation, the physical temptation, I will save you. The heat salty. So now that you have taken away that physical thing, now you have to replace it with something, right? You've taken away that chocolate bar. You really have this like temptation to eat the chocolate bar. So now what are you going to do? Cookies. I'm not gonna say healthy brownies, healthy bean brownies. Something that you're replacing it with. So it could be a healthy alternative for food, or it could be, instead of eating now, I'm going to call a friend because I'm not hungry. I'm just bored. So I'm going to call a friend instead, or I'll go for a walk instead. Yeah. Replace it with something. Replace it with something else. Something positive. So you take a proactive step to do something, to conquer your negative habit. Third step is, I will redeem you. Now that you've taken this proactive step, you've gone for a walk, or you've listened, you're ready to lash out in anger. Instead of lashing out in anger, put on some calming music. Do something else positive. Bring something positive in that will take away that negative habit that you were about to lash out in. Third step is, I will redeem you. And I will redeem you means now that you've done these proactive steps, conquering the negative habit, now it's time to analyze, how did I get there in the first place? What's the underlying emotional cause that caused me to want to do that? So is it that at a certain time of the day, I get bored? Is it that at a certain time of the day, I have this trigger? Was it stress? Was it a fear? What is it that, let's take a step back and look at the emotional situation. What triggered me? Do I get triggered from this person for a reason? Is there an emotional baggage that's involved with it, that's holding me back, that's causing me to react in that way? What's the emotional trigger? What's missing in my life emotionally that's causing this to happen? So this thing, whatever it is that is triggering me, is really a crutch. How do I replace this crutch with something more positive? So often we take food because we're bored. Often we'll lash out at somebody because of some emotional baggage in our lives. Let's find it and replace it. The next step is, I will take you to me as a people, v'lakachti. And here we're talking about, we've done the first step, which is remove the trigger from in front of us. We've replaced it with something temporary, that we've gone for a walk or we've done something else. We've replaced it with something positive. We've looked at the emotional triggers of what caused it. Now we need to take a look at the spiritual triggers. The spiritually in my life, what is missing in my life? What purpose? How can I find purpose and meaning in my life so that I'm looking for other things? When we look at physical things, it's often a cover-up of something of a deeper spiritual thing that we're looking for. And so here, spiritually, let's take a look. After we've addressed the emotional issue, we need to look at the spiritual issue of how can I find more purpose and more meaning in my life. And finally, the last one is, I will bring you to the land. God is saying that he'll bring us to the promised land. And this is the recognition that as much as we do, the steps that we take, I think this is even in the 12-step program, is the recognition that ultimately everything is up to God. Everything is up to God. My higher power is running the world. I do my part. I do my steps. I do the steps that I need to do. I take the steps in my life that are required of me, the actual removing the item, the proactive steps, the emotional looking at it, the spiritual working at it, but ultimately my life is really given over to God. The steps of man are decided by God. God decides the outcome, and I need to have that recognition that everything in life that is happening is coming from something greater than myself, from God himself. So these are the 5 steps to take ourselves out of a bad habit, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. I just want to do one more thing, but I'm going to ask you to actually think about how you can apply those 5 steps to your own life. But one last thing that I want to talk about in this week's Torah portion is how do we know what is a bad habit? How do we know when something is bad or something is good? And we see that with actually the plagues in this week's Torah portion. The first plagues are blood, then frogs, then lice. And these are addressing all the plagues in Egypt were not just happenstance, didn't just happen, but there was a grand plan in order to create an outcome of the Exodus. And these first plagues were in order for us to look at our emotions and look at the emotions that are happening in our lives and how to channel our emotions properly. So when we look at the first thing, the water turned into blood. We're looking at something like water, which is cold, and it's turning into blood, which is hot, we're hot-blooded, right? We're the heat. What was the reason? What was the purpose of this plague? In Egypt, how did they get water? From the Nile. What happened with the Nile?
Turned to blood.
It would, well, before it turned into blood, but how did they get the water from the Nile? What happened? How did it irrigate? It would overflow. It would overflow, and there was enough fertile silt in the Nile that it would actually go onto the land and it would irrigate the land. Let's compare that to the land of Israel. In the land of Israel, till today, how do we get irrigation? Through the pipes, but where's it coming from? Rain, the sky, rain, right? That's why we even start the prayers in the rainy season, right after Sukkot. We start praying, asking God. We pray for rain. Mashiv haruach u'marid hageshem. We start saying, God, please give us the rain that we need. Saint Talamatar, give us the rain that we need. And this is according to the land of Israel, the schedule of the land of Israel. In Israel, they need rain. What is rain? You look up. You look up to the sky for rain, right? You're looking up to God. You're realizing that the rain is falling from God. God decides when rain falls. As much as we know with the meteorologists and all that, we never know when the rain is coming. It's up to God, right? God decides when there's rain. So we're looking up to God for our irrigation, for our sustenance. The land of Israel is naturally made in a way that it's a holy land. We're constantly looking up to God for irrigation, for water, for our preservation, for the preservation of what we need. In the land of Egypt, however, things were the opposite. They didn't look to God. It was considered a natural thing that just happened. The Nile just happened to overflow. So this looking at the Nile was completely changed over, that the Nile turned into blood. This Nile, which was the water which was cold, turned into blood. And this was reminiscent of how their feelings were towards materiality. Their feelings were that they were very cold towards God. There was no feelings towards God. but they were such materialistic people. They were looking for the Nile to provide their materialism, but they weren't looking to God. Their coldness was to God, but their warmth was to materiality. And God is saying the Nile that provided all this to you has now turned into blood. It turned into something. Your passion towards God, think about spirituality, has to be ignited. The next plague was the plague of frogs. Now the frogs, it says, went into the ovens. Frogs are cold-blooded creatures, and the cold-blooded creatures that always like to be in the water, which is cold, and these frogs went even into their ovens. They went everywhere. It was a plague that went all over into Egypt, even into their ovens. And this was to tell the Egyptians that materiality, the materialism that you're so full of, has to feel less cold about materialism. So feel more warmth about godliness, feel more warmth towards God, and feel colder towards materialism. And this is to teach us as well in our own lives how we need to, the emotions that we need to change. We're talking about different habits that we need to change. What does it mean, a habit that we need to change? A habit that we need to change means look at your emotions. Where is your heat? Where is your passion? Where are you feeling heated about and excited about and full of emotions about? And where are you feeling cold and indifferent about? The excitement has to come from spirituality, from looking towards God, from the connection that we have to God. The materiality, the materialism is something that we can use in our service of God, but we need to feel less excitement about that materialism and feel the excitement instead for the godliness, for the spirituality that we have in our lives. And finally, the lice is like a parasite. It eats off of something good, right? It eats off of people's bodies. And the point of it was to say, things need to be used. We can't be like parasites just using the good that we have in our lives for our own needs. We need to use the good that we have in our lives for spiritual needs. So we all have been blessed with a lot of goodness in our lives. We need to take that goodness and not just use it for our own sake. The Egyptians used art, architecture, all their achievements, all the accomplishments that they had for their own needs, for their own making themselves bigger, making themselves feel greater, and instead of using them in the service of something greater. And this teaches us that we need to use the gifts that we've been given, not just for our own purpose, for our own comfort, but to use it in the service of something greater. We can't just be like that parasite, that lice, eating like a parasite off of the goodness that we have and using it just for ourselves. But we need to take the goodness in our lives, the goodness that we've been blessed with, and use it to help others, to help in our connection with God, to create more goodness and spirituality in this world. So those are the lessons from this week's Torah portion. And now I'd want to just end off with those 5 habits, how to break those habits. We can all go around and think about a specific habit in your own life and how it is that you can use these 5 steps of redemption to break that habit. And that is this week's Torah portion.